días a todos en este tercer día del octavo Congreso del Simposio Internacional en Comportamiento y Aplicaciones. El día de hoy tengo el honor de presentar a la doctora María Emilia Yamamoto, que impartirá una conferencia invitada sobre las razones de por qué cooperamos desde una perspectiva evolutiva. Antes de cederle la palabra para que haga su presentación, quisiera hacer una breve semblanza de la doctora María Emilia. María Emilia Yamamoto es profesora emérita de la Universidad Federal del Río Grande del Norte. Ella tiene un doctorado en psicobiología por la Universidad Federal de Sao Paulo, UNIFESP, y tuvo un postdoctorado en la Universidad de Reading, en el Reino Unido, también en psicobiología. Ella ha desarrollado estudios en comportamiento animal y psicología evolutiva y ha coordinado el programa de graduados en psicobiología en la Universidad Federal la Universidad Federal de Sao Paulo. Desde 1999 a 2003 y es coordinadora del proyecto Millennium en Psicología Evolutiva del 2005 al 2009 y es al presente editora asistente de la revista Evolutionary Human Sciences. La doctora presentará su trabajo en inglés y les pedimos que nos envíen las preguntas que tengan para hacérselas al final de su presentación. Dejo con ustedes a la doctora María Emilia Yamamoto. Adelante, doctora.
Muchas gracias por la presentación. Peço desculpas porque mi español es muy malo. Yo no puedo hacer la presentación en español. Entonces, poder inglés. So, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope you enjoy my presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about cooperation from an evolutionary perspective. Okay, so species, as you know, may be solitary, like the koalas, or social, like the monkeys. And when they are social, they also show cooperation, mostly among them. But there is one species I didn't know that is hyper-cooperative, and these are ourselves, the human beings. Human beings show cooperation that goes beyond family and extends to non-relatives and even unknown individuals, as you see in this photo. And this is called proactive sociality. Work with collaborators suggests that proactive sociality is a function of allomaternal care, and they studied the function compared allomaternal care and proactive sociality in 15 species of primates. And two of those species are two species that I studied, the marmots here in this picture, and the guinea. As fascinating as marmosets are, I'm not going to talk about them today. I'm going to focus my talk on human beings. And so I'm going to examine hyper-cooperation in human beings, highlighting development and parochial behavior. And I'm going to start with development. So the question that we are trying to help is if humans show a predisposition to help others. And the literature shows that empathy and cooperation are present in humans from a very early age. And the studies that looked at the youngest children were the studies from Henling and her group. And I'm going to discuss very quickly here one of the first papers that she published, where she tested very young babies, 8-month babies, to distinguish right and wrong and preference for helpful individuals. And she tested that using a puppet show. So there was one puppet that had a toy, and he lost that toy. One of the puppets gave the toy back to the first one, but another one threw it away, and the babies preferred the one that was helpful. But many other things were studied in young infants, like spontaneous cooperation, coordination of behavior with peers, intrinsic motivation to help, and the ability to identify norms as well as norm violations, the capacity to show empathy, and also in older children, the awareness of the reputation. And older children are more generous before an audience when they are alone. So there is a propensity to cooperate and to help, and that probably is given to biological influences. But of course, those biological influences are modulated throughout life by social and cultural influences. And the studies that I'm going to discuss with you here is investigate the effect of such social influences. And to study that, we use the game theory model, more specifically in this study, the public goods game. And we use the public goods game with school children, public school children in Natal, Brazil. Before I explain the study to you, I just like to emphasize that this study was made with low-income children, which are a very understudied population. I studied from 2017, showed that 9% of all the samples regard findings published in top developmental psychology journals originated from English and European countries. And South and Central Americas represents 0.7% of published finds in the development studies. So it's very important that we, South Americans and Central American scientists, show the results of our studies. So, which was the working model that we used? We gave the children 3 candy bars and an envelope. They went behind a screen that they have in the classroom, and behind that screen, they could donate 1, 2, 3, or none of the candy bars that they had received to a common good. And they would put the envelope inside a box that was behind the panel. So no one knew what the children were doing behind the panel. After every children had gone behind the panel, we would open the envelope in front of the groups, and for each candy bar donated, we would add 2 more. And that, the candy bar donated and the one that we add were the public goods. That was divided equally among all children, even the ones that weren't generous at all, because they kept all the 3 candy bars. We repeated that procedure during 8 days, and each child, which varied from 5 to 11 years old, participated in 1 game only. So what we wanted to know was what circumstances would influence children's cooperative behavior in that public goods game. And we investigate, I'm going to tell you the investigation of 2 social influences. One was verbal feedback and the other was vigilance. And why we did that? We did because the literature says that these are important variables in the expression of cooperation. So the literature says that cooperative behavior in children is susceptible to adult influence, to moral exhortation. And also that in school-aged children, verbal cues promote an increase in cooperation. So according to that, we expected that both kinds of feedbacks, both positive as well as negative, would increase donations. And so that's how it worked. After opening the envelopes, in the positive feedback group, when there were 3 or 2 candy bars, we would say, that's cool, that person was generous to the group, that person was good to the group. In the negative feedback group, when there was 1 candy bar or none, would say that's annoying, that person has not been generous to the group, that person was not good to the group. And in the control situation, the control condition, there was no feedback at all. The other condition was vigilance or monitoring. In that case, an adult confederate stayed behind the panel and watched the children making their donations. We told the children that the adult would be observing their donations, but would keep them secret. And so we predict that older children will be more generous in the vigilance condition because older children are more worried about their reputation. And so here we have the results. In red, we have the younger children up to 8 years old, and in blue, the older children. And so all children, older and young, were less generous in the control condition than in other conditions. But younger children were more generous in the positive feedback, and older children were more generous in the monitoring condition. So overall, what can we say? We expected increases in cooperation on both feedback conditions, but only negative feedback diminished the free riding, the non-presentation of cooperation. And we asked why that should happen, and one possibility for the difference was that the message that we conveyed in the negative feedback was that something was wrong. But in the positive feedback, the message conveyed that, well, everything is all right because these people were generous to the group, these people was good to the group. So the negative feedback had a moral effect, signaling that the absence of donation should be avoided and the behavior should be corrected to fit the experimenter's expectations. That's a moral behavior. And in general, control was the least effective condition promoting sociality. But we also want to see other influences in cooperation. And one student of mine recently had a study on the influence of on prosocial behaviors of skin color. Why did we decide to study that? Because Brazil is a very miscegenated country, and we want to see if skin color will influence cooperation. And to do that, she used a priming procedure. A priming is an implicit stimulus, which when presented, influence how people respond to a subsequent stimulus. So I give an example here of a study that's old, but it's very enlightening and explains very well the priming. And that study was made in a wine shop. And in the wine shop, two kinds of music could be playing, German music or French music. That was the implicit stimulus. That was the priming stimulus. And what happened was, when there was German music, there were increased sales of German wine. When there was French music, the sales of French wine increased. So we had one stimulus, which was the music, that influences the other stimulus, which is the choice of the wine. So the sample was also of public school children, so low-income children, and the racial composition of the group was 65% were pardos, 24% white, and 10% were black. That mirrors the composition of the racial composition of the Brazilian population. The skin color was done by auto-identification by the children using a multicolor scale. So we had two kinds of group. One was the priming group, and the other was the control group. In the priming group, we had a video, which was the prime. I'll explain it later, a distraction task, and then a prosocial task. And in the control condition, there was the same thing, but we didn't have a video. So the video that I won't have the time to show you because it's a little bit long, but I'll explain how it worked. And here are images from the video that we showed to the children. And the priming was the skin color and the behavior of a prosocial child. The video showed a playroom where all the children had toys, except for one little boy that didn't have any toy. But another boy had 2 toys. And when this other boy realizes that this boy is without any toy, he offers you one, and they both play together. The children from our experiment could watch one of 2 videos. They were exactly the same, except for the fact that in one of them, the prosocial child was black, and in the other one, he was white. So after watching the video, we had the distraction task and then the prosocial task. In the prosocial task, we presented the children with 4 items, each one at a time, each one of the children. They were isolated with the experimenter and asked them to choose 2 of those items. They would choose 2, and then we asked, would you like to share your items or one of your items with your best friend in classroom? And she could say, no, I don't. I want to keep both of the items and I won't donate any. Or she could say, well, I will donate one, but keep this other one. Or they could say, I want to donate both of them. Again, that didn't happen. No one wants to donate both. Okay. So first of all, we want to look at which children shared more regarding characteristics of the children. And so the first characteristics that we looked at was the skin color. And the subject could be, as I told you, white, pardo, or black. And the children that shared more were the pardo children. And that is considered, I will discuss this a little bit later with you, a response to ostracism. And also, the older children shared more than younger children. So remember, the sharing was done in front of an experimenter. So reputation was at stake. And as we saw in the other experiment, reputation is important for older children. And indeed, 8 years and older were the children that donate more. So after that, we compared priming and control groups to see if priming indeed boosted cooperation. And when we compared the 2 priming groups and the no priming groups, there was indeed an increase of prosocial behavior by the children that watched the video. But we also want to know if the color of the prosocial child would influence the prosocial behavior of the children. And what we saw that regardless of the skin color, in fact, priming increased prosocial behavior. But when we compared the 2 priming situations and the control situations, when there was a black character, there was an increase in prosocial behavior, but not in comparison to the control situation, but not from the white character and the control situation. So skin color had an important effect here, and the black character was the one that increased sharing in comparison with the no priming group. What can we say about that? The literature suggests that pardo and black children are more generous than white children as a response to ostracism and possibly as an expectation of inclusion. If I am more generous, people will like me more and they will be nicer to me. But in our study, ostracism had an effect only in pardo children, possibly because they have more chances or maybe more expectation of inclusion, given the high miscegenation in Brazil and the influence of socioeconomic status in social acceptation, which allows for people that are not white to be also accepted because they have a high socioeconomic status. So priming in this case activates prosociality, particularly when there was a Black character, through feelings then again of segregation and loss of status, as was seen also in the literature. However, that was the nice part. Cooperation is not always automatic or all-inclusive. We direct our cooperation to some groups and restrain from cooperation to others. So the question we have to ask is, who do we cooperate with? So human cooperation may be intensified by sharing ideas and beliefs and by the feeling of belonging. This kind of cooperation is favored by the identification with groups or individuals that share common beliefs and ideas and which may favor a group bias, or also called parochialism or ethnocentrism. The identification group is called an in-group, and the no identification group is called an out-group. So the in-group is the me, the us, the right, the self. The out-group is the you, the them, the wrong, and the others. But you can say, well, we are all humans. Why is there in-group or out-group? Because there are a lot of human characteristics that separate us, divided us, like race, like religion, like politics, like wealth. And I will examine two such biases, which are religion and football. Starting with religion. Brazil is the greatest Catholic country in the world, but this scenario is changing. And if we compare the first census that was made in Brazil in 1940 to the last one, which was in 1910, and in 1920, which should be another, there wasn't one done because of the pandemic, but there is a very extensive survey from a publication company. And so I'm going to compare what changed in religion in Brazil from 1940 to 1920. In 1940, 95% of all Brazilians declared themselves Catholics. And there were very few Pentecostals and people that declared themselves non-religious. However, in 2020, the percentage of people who declare themselves Catholics fall to 50% of the population, which is huge. And also there was a very large increase of Pentecostal persons, and also an increase, which is noticeable, from 1.9 to 10 of people who declared they didn't have any religion. So there is a strong group identification among individuals that profess the same religion. You can expect that because they share beliefs, they share rituals, they share things that think are right or wrong. So we should expect that strong identification. But what about individuals that share ideas, like atheists? I mean, they don't share institutionalized things. They just share some ideas that they have. So we compared cooperation between religious and atheist individuals to see if they were similar. And again, we use a public goods game, like I told you before. One was just like I described with the children, where there was a donation and the donor would benefit from that donation because there was a direct reward. Or in another case, there was an indirect reward. So the donations went to a separate group that shared the same beliefs that the donors, but the belief itself was not, did not benefit from it. So here we have the two conditions: direct reward, no direct reward. And here we have the Catholics, Pentecostals, other religions, which was a mix of many religions because they were very few, we couldn't make any group, and the atheists. In blue, the in-group donations, and in red, the out-group donations. So what happened, the direct reward? all groups donated more to their in-group, but only the Catholics, Neo-Pentecostal, and other religions were significantly different. Although atheists donated more to their in-group, that was not significantly different. Let's go to the non-direct reward, and here things changed because only the Neo-Pentecostal and the atheists donated significantly more for their in-group. Other religions did not, and that's understandable because that was a very heterogeneous group. But Catholics should do that too. Why Catholics weren't generous to their in-group in that circumstance? And so in Brazil, there are a lot of people that we call lepers Catholics. They are Catholics because the family is Catholic, but they don't go to church, they don't have strong beliefs, but they still call themselves Catholic. And though these leper Catholics didn't benefit their own group, their in-group, but practicing Catholics did. They were as wanting to share with their in-group as the Pentecostals and the atheists. So if we have an overall view of what happened, let's look at the religious, which are the practicing Catholics and the Pentecostals first, and then we look at the atheists. In direct reward, there was in-group favoritism by the religious people, but also self-benefit. But in the no direct reward, in-group favoritism among Pentecostal and practicing Catholics were poor, but not largely Catholic. And that probably helped because there is a group significance. So people wanted to favor their in-group. As to the atheists, there was a non-significant in-group favoritism. That may be due to a small sample. We have very few atheists in our sample. But when we went to the non-direct reward, in-group favoritism was very strong. So we should say that was because there was group significance also. But why? Since they are not an institutionalized group like the religious group. So one thing that we think probably influences that is the small number of atheists there are in Brazil. And we know from social psychology that small groups increase their cohesion. And so that's probably one of the things that was happening here. And also because in Brazil, most people that are atheists, they are because they had an active choice that they made, not when they are children, but when they are adults, and they did it for their own will. And so they have much more certainty of that choice than most religious people have. Anyway, group significant boost cooperation, both in the religious people and in atheists. But devotion, so as we saw in the religious people, may boost cooperation. But devotion may be present in environments that are not so holy, and that is football. And so what we see here is a group of fans, a fans club, that are very happily going to a match of their team. And that all that happiness can very easily turn into violence and sometimes death. So what happens here? One student of mine, Leonardo Coimbra, studied generosity in football fans. And he wanted to look at exactly that very close relationship between fans of the same team and that antagonism towards fans of a rival team. And so he studied generosity in those individuals and also what motivated that generosity. And his hypothesis was that that motivation was the social identity with the team. So how did it work that? First of all, he recruited funds of a team, and then the first thing that, of course, had his consentment to make the experiment, participate in the experiment, and then he used the manometer to measure what he called a maximum basal effort, which was 3 tentatives at the manometer, where he was instructed to press it as hard as he could, as strong as he could. After he did that, the mean of the 3 attempts were called the maximum basal effort. Then he was directed to one of 3 possible groups, 2 prosocial and 1 antisocial. The prosocial group could be prosocial to the in-group or prosocial to the out-group, and the antisocial was antisocial to the out-group. And so they were instructed to press the manometer harder than they have in the maximal basal effort, either to benefit the in-group or benefit the out-group in the prosocial condition, or to harm the out-group in the antisocial condition. And then he answered a scale on team identification. So we are going to look at the results, but first I'm going to highlight the results of fans with high identification of the team. If you go to a stadium, that's how the high identification fans are presented. Among the other fans of the team, very loud and very willing to see their team win. Those that show a low identification with the team are those that go to the stadium for some fun time. They mix with fans from other teams, and they're all happy with whatever the result of the match is. So let's see what happened then in the 3 conditions that he tested: prosocial in-group, prosocial out-group, and social out-group. So the first is they had to make an effort to benefit the in-group. And here, independent of team identification, which is here, they all made an effort to benefit the prosocial group. Then we look at the prosocial out-group, how much they were willing to make an effort to benefit the out-group. And the ones that have a low team identity show a high effort to benefit the out-group, the rival team. But the ones that had a high identity with the team didn't make any effort at all to benefit the out-group. And finally, the antisocial condition where the subject had to make an effort to harm the out-group. And the ones that have low identity with the group, with the team, didn't make any effort to hide the out-group, but the ones that had a high identity made an effort to harm the out-group. So the parochialism studies, the religious studies, and the football studies showed the same results. The football fans, the study with the football fans emphasized the results of the religious atheist study, in that group significance favored in-group cooperation. So the fans that had more identification with the teams form a group that was more significant, and then they favored in-group cooperation. In football, however, identification with team modulated not only in-group cooperation, but also out-group antagonism. In general, what can we say of the studies that we saw here? Both the studies on development and the studies on parochialism. So, the literature suggests that infants have a rudimentary moral sense from very early in life. That is demonstrated by empathy, spontaneous helping, awareness of reputation. So that's what happens in the very beginning of life is a biological starting point. It's like a basic apparatus to a moral system that is molded by socialization and culture as children age. So there's a double effect. A basic apparatus that is biological, basically, and a modulation by culture and social variables that also are going to act on the cooperation in the children. So I want to show here a study by House and collaborators that exemplifies that very nicely. And he made a study in cooperations with 6 societies, American societies, and 5 others that were foragers, herders, and horticulturalists. And he studied children in a sharing choice, very much the one I showed you in the skin color study, in children from 3 to 14 years of age, and then in adults from the same society. Each color represents one of those societies. So if you look at the beginning of the curves here, we see that children are cooperative in the beginning of life, and then around 6 to 7 years, they start dropping that prosociality, and that drop in prosociality goes until 10 to 11 years. Then they start showing an increase in prosociality. So that increase, however, is different for the various societies. And if you look at the dots here that represents the adult society, we see that the adolescents tend to show a point that is very similar to the ones that the adults show. So at the beginning of life, they show a biological influence, that biological apparatus I was talking about. But when they get to a point where they have had the socialization in a specific culture, they show behavior that's similar to what the culture presents. So we have biological and social influences modulate adult prosocial behavior. So that gives us an evidence of plasticity of prosocial behavior. Both children and adults adjust their behavior to their environment and their culture. But prosocial behavior is not universal. Parochialism is a strong predictor of both cooperative as antagonistic behaviors. Morality, then, is a synthesis of the biological and the cultural. And uncovering the effect of environmental variables may help promote cooperation and prosociality. Maybe even in the most unlikely cases. So I want to acknowledge all that support financially these studies, and also my research teams that are represented here. And I thank you for the patience to listen to me for that time, and my if anyone wants to get in contact. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por su conferencia, doctora, muy clara y muy evidentes las investigaciones que está reportando. Y bueno, pues le agradecemos por, a través de esta conferencia, donarnos más de 2 barras de chocolate, de las que usted tiene. Muy bien, quisiera pasar a las preguntas. Y quisiera primero hacerle 2 preguntas que tienen que ver con el fenómeno de la reciprocidad. Quisiera que pudiera hacernos algún comentario sobre cómo se explica desde una perspectiva evolutiva el fenómeno de la reciprocidad. Es decir, si un individuo coopera, ¿qué tanto el resto de ellos también cooperan con él? O viceversa, si un individuo no coopera, sino es antagonista con el otro, ¿qué tanta reciprocidad hay también en la no cooperación? ¿Y cuál es la perspectiva evolutiva para explicar este fenómeno? Y segundo, ¿Cuál es el rol de la reciprocidad para modificar estos patrones culturales que nos ha mostrado?
Reciprocity is very common in human beings. Is it all right if I speak in English? Yeah. Is it all right if I speak in English? So reciprocity is very common in human groups, and they may occur, but it's not obligatory. In many groups, there are what we call free riders. There are those that benefit but do not reciprocate to all. So what happens if a group is small? Those people are ostracized. I mean, or they are thrown away. In large groups that may not it would be in a small group. And so free riders can get very well because they receive the benefits of reciprocity, but they don't pay the costs of the reciprocity. But even though we have a tendency to be cooperative, to reciprocate, and that's on our evolutionary test. Because and the only way to have a survival being social is to cooperate with others. So we have to cooperate with others. And so from an evolutionary point of view, we would expect reciprocity. Again, we are not only God, we are social, and so people can take advantage of situations where we can not reciprocate them. Did that answer your?
Yes, thank you, doctora. Muchas gracias. Otra pregunta tiene que ver con las trampas sociales, que implican el fenómeno de las trampas sociales, que implican un beneficio inmediato personal, pero un efecto social desagradable para el grupo, como por ejemplo el uso de los vehículos que nos permiten transportarnos rápidamente, pero que tienen un efecto negativo al grupo en términos de contaminación y poca movilidad. ¿Cómo revertir ese tipo de fenómenos desde una perspectiva cooperativa y evolutiva, doctora?
We say in evolutionary biology that we have two kinds of causes. Ones are proximate causes and the other are ultimate causes. So ultimate causes are those that are determined by evolution. So it comes from a line of biological human beings. But proximate causes also influence our behavior. And so although we may have tendencies that come from our evolutionary lineage, we have also proximate cases that may cause us not to do what's right. So we don't feel exactly what happens if we are destroying the environment. We don't think that's going to bring harm to our children, to our grandchildren. So we try sometimes to act on what is immediate, and that is a proximate cause. So what we have to do is to act as we are rational beings. We have to think what we are doing may cause, and then plan, even if that goes against a tendency to do what's better in evolutionary terms is to gain some benefits. Okay, and so that you know, there is a book that's a little bit by what's his name? I'm not. I'll remember in a while the name, but he which is called The Moral Animal, And he says that we only become moral when we recognize that we are not moral. So we have to recognize that we are doing wrong things to do the right thing. Okay, but we have the cognition to do that.
Pero bueno, algunos pensamos que los individuos no funcionamos por racionalidad, sino que el comportamiento está determinado por muchos factores, además del razonamiento lógico. ¿Cómo poder modificar estas diferencias de antagonismo culturales, religiosas, sociales, a través de intervenciones? ¿Cómo promover la colaboración y la cooperación, inclusive entre grupos distintos?
I agree with you. I don't think that we act rationally, but we have the ability to analyze rationally what we are doing. You have to pay attention to that. I think that's the only way to do that. But we also have to have what we call group pressure. I mean, besides knowing that I'm doing something wrong, I have to know that people is watching me. And if I do it wrong, I'll have a consequence to that. And so you also have to have group pressure to do that, because many times people that, well, they are not so worried about the common good, will do what they think is best for them and won't listen to their own cognition, their own goodwill. So that has to be shown to them. But that's an effort, and that's what that author said about only being moral when you recognize that you are not moral, you know, because then we say, no, but I have to do it. I have to do what's right. That's the way it goes. Because sometimes we think of collaboration, cooperation as something good, but it's not good always. I mean, you have cooperation, as I showed in football fans, to beat other football fans, to harm other football fans. You have cooperation in a robbers group to harm other people. So cooperation is not good in itself. It has to have a moral behind it. We have a tendency to cooperate, but in our own benefit, we have to learn to cooperate in the benefit of all.
Muchas gracias por su respuesta. Recibe felicitaciones por su trabajo, que es muy interesante, de dos personas. Y una más pregunta: ¿existe evidencia de claves o estímulos antecedentes que faciliten la ocurrencia de la conducta cooperativa? ¿Se podría considerar que el monitoreo funciona como un tipo de estímulo antecedente dentro del contexto natural del individuo?
Sí. See, yes. You have a context that favors cooperation. There are many studies that show that when you talk about parochialism, like I did, if you have a group that's uniform, you have more cooperation. If you see something that moves you, that's emotional, you'll be more cooperative. So absolutely, yes. You can have antecedent stimulus that are going to favor cooperation. We have to discover in many situations which stimulus are those and use them.
Una última pregunta, doctora. Desde una perspectiva evolutiva, ¿cómo se explican las conductas de cooperación de un individuo en un grupo al que no pertenece?
Well, I showed a bit of that in the skin color study. Many times when you are an out group, you act according to the in group, because that can favor you. You may be more accepted than if you acted different from the group. All of us, well, I studied for twice in a foreign school. First time I was a teenager, and I rapidly adapted because I felt very put apart. It was in the United States, and they have, at least at that time, they have, I think they still do, in a small town, they had many prejudices against foreign people, especially in Latin America. I mean, I was a very fancy European. I was a Latin American. And so they had many prejudices against me. So rapidly, I was acting like an American. I learned to speak English and very quickly, and I learned to act like them because that would make more acceptable in that situation. And so really it's what happens, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. As everything else, it has always two sides to it.
Muy bien, pues le agradecemos mucho sus respuestas, pero sobre todo la riqueza de su trabajo que ha desarrollado durante tantos años y su colaboración en esta conferencia. Agradecemos también a la audiencia asistente y con esto damos por terminada esta sesión. Muchas gracias a todos. Un gusto conocerle, doctora Emilia.
Muchas gracias a usted. Es un placer estar aquí.